Hi everyone. On this episode of Photo Book Review, we're going over Joel Sternfeld's contemplative, reflective, pretty solemn work on the site. If you've been following Photo Book Review, if you'd like to support, there's a Patreon linked in the bio. I also just posted a video, a Nan Golden book review that was taken down from YouTube, and so because of issues they had with it. But Patreon is where I'm going to put photo book reviews that cover subjects that YouTube might not like, and so you'll find it there. The Nan Golden Ballad of Sexual Dependency photo book review is on there. Future ones are going to be available to members, and I'll post when those go up. But let's get into Joel Sternfeld. This book is a collection of photographs Sternfeld made at the sites of events of national significance that were tragic or horrific or formative in some major way. Sternfeld, his work kind of straddles between two landscapes. I would say the physical and social landscapes. The sites he photographs are scenes from states across the country, so he's gone over the whole country photographing these places. And the sites range in subject matter. He's photographing the country store where Emmett Till was said to have catcalled at a young girl. He's photographed that storefront. He's photographed the hotel where tobacco executives decided that they were going to suppress medical information that said cigarette could lead to cancer. But these sites kind of bring reality to these events, and they bring them to the forefront out of the dust of history, I would say, and shows you the place and location associated with each tragedy. There's almost a prompt to the viewer what they should do when they look at these images. And so let's take this first image, for example. Mount Rushmore, a national monument. And this is a format that you will see across this book by Sternfeld. Image to the right, title to the left, and then a caption underneath. And so this caption talks about how the federal government deeded millions of acres in the Black Hills of South Dakota to the Sioux Nation. And then 9 years later, when gold was found, Congress broke the treaty. This happened in 1868, and the treaty was broken in 77. And then it says in the 1920s, the state of South Dakota, eager to attract tourists, commissioned a sculptor to carve a colossal monument in Mount Rushmore. The Sioux still considered the Black Hills their own sacred land. In 1980, the Supreme Court awarded the Sioux $17 million plus interest accrued in 1877 as compensation. This award is now valued at nearly $300 million. But the Sioux continue to refuse the money and to seek title to their land. And so Sternfeld associates this specific tragedy with this location, and you see it. And they're usually locations, or the locations range from national monuments to street corners. And the tragedies go from kind of governmental mistakes to personal tragedies. Sternfeld himself faced familiar tragedies throughout his life, actually losing a brother to cancer and another brother to a drunk driver. A little background on Sternfeld. He graduated from Dartmouth, and currently he teaches at Sarah Lawrence College in New York. He's a very prolific photographer. His big breakout book was American Prospects. His photographs are intentionally political and usually focus on issues of environmental justice. even before it was a popular idea to promote, as we see now with a lot of justice causes. He states in interviews that the time between Jimmy Carter's presidency and Ronald Reagan's presidency was a big deal for him, and this reminds me of some of the political urges that Larry Sultan has. He also too talks about how the Reagan's presidency was important in shaping the way he looked at family and photography. Actually, he states in interviews that between Carter and Reagan presidencies, it was a turning point because he saw this kind of facade of everything's all right. Don't worry about it. We have this under control. And part of this book is showing the violence, as Sternfeld would say, the violence of this country. So we have here the former Bryant's Grocery, Money, Mississippi. In 1955, Emmett Till, a 14-year-old boy from Chicago, was visiting relatives. Anxious to show his new friends that he knew how to talk to white women, Till said, "Bye, baby," to Carolyn Bryant as he left the store. 3 days later, Bryant's husband, Roy, and his half-brother kidnapped, tortured, and killed Till. Milam and Bryant were found not guilty by an all-male, all-white jury. The deliberations lasted a little over an hour. And then we have this photograph. This should be a memorial site. This is a real place that exists that you can go to, and it's more than just a story when you have the photograph. And look in the disrepair that it's in. It almost feels forgotten, but Sternfeld documents it here. Titles and captions play a very large role in Sternfeld's books. Visually, they're given a great deal of space. The entire opposing page of the photograph. The title is at the top and just really gives bare bones description. So aisle 2, row 3, seat 5, Texas Theater, 231 West Jefferson Boulevard, Dallas, Texas, November 1993. If all you had to go off of was the title, you would still be kind of curious about why is this beautiful theater chair being photographed. And then the caption says, Lee Harvey Oswald was sitting in this seat when he was arrested by Dallas police, November 22nd, 1963. The double feature playing that day was Cry of Battle and War is Hell. So, I think compared to the Mount Rushmore photograph, this photograph is so kind of plain and everyday. It's a site that's of no importance, a site that isn't particularly valuable. It's not a unique site. There's a theater full of chairs that look just like this chair, but this is an ordinary location where something extraordinary happened. I think sometimes too, Sternfeld is photographing the absence of things. So that's, unless you've tried to photograph something that isn't there, you don't realize how hard that is. And this photograph is a particularly strong example of that. This is a location in Queens, New York, where a woman was stabbed to death for half an hour and laying on the street, writhing in pain, and no one called the police. And the attacker came back and killed her. This is a corner that we would walk by and maybe think nothing of it. We wouldn't think about the good, the bad, or indifferent that would happen there. And there's really nothing here to be photographed other than the scene itself. And it's hard to photograph something that isn't there. But I think landscape photographers have an added difficulty of trying to photograph such a large sense of place, like this whole block, and this whole block indicates a whole neighborhood, and so where do you stand to get everything in the view? I like this this form that Sternfeld deals with title and caption and image. I actually feel more informed after I looked at this book, and it's a very powerful way to work, especially if you're trying to communicate the significance of a site. This is the Lorraine Motel where Dr. Martin Luther King was assassinated. And there's a wreath there, and it's a beautiful photograph of a space, but what this caption does, it allows Sternfeld to contextualize himself, the events that happened there, and at times what he thinks of it as well. So what I want to do now is go into specific images that I think really struck me. This one in particular, Cuyahoga River, Cleveland, Ohio. The Cuyahoga River burned for more than an hour June 22nd, 1969, after molten slag from a steel mill was dumped into the river and ignited other pollutants. A river was on fire because it was so polluted. That's unbelievable. That's dystopian. But we have it, and we have a view of the river. We know what it looks like. We know that it's real. It's documented here. But I think, had I not read some of these things and seen the photographs in Sternfeld's book, they would be too unbelievable to believe. But the power of photography is how literal it is. Something John Zarkowski was famous for saying was that a photograph describes everything, but it explains nothing. And text and photography work together so well because you have the picture to describe and the text to explain. This picture right here is a site, I won't read the whole caption, but it's a site where a whistleblower who had worked with a Times reporter about some quality control documents from a plutonium plant. The whistleblower was going to bring attention to some of the policies that this plutonium plant was breaking, and it was incriminating evidence. And this is a spot where her car was found, ran off the road, and she was dead while she was on the way to talk to a Times reporter. Oklahoma State Police determined that Silkwood, under the influence of barbiturates, had fallen asleep at the wheel. Independent investigators concluded that Silkwood had been forced off the road by another vehicle. Some of the images in this book have a conversation with one another too. You might see here we go. So what I mean by conversation is this is the site in which a black man was pulled out of his car and beaten by LA police, Rodney King. Right here, this is a site that happened then. And this sparked the LA riots in the 90s. King was pulled over after leading police on an 8-mile high-speed chase. So the police were chasing him when he was pulled over, or when he pulled over. He was drunk and resisted arrest, and then 20 officers used extreme force and beat him nearly to death. And when the footage of this was being recorded, it sparked outrage in LA, and he nearly died. The 4 officers were acquitted of all criminal charges. And then later on, so that's the site where Rodney King was beaten. And right here is a site where a white truck driver was pulled from his semi during the LA riots and nearly beaten to death himself. His name was Reginald Denny. A white truck driver was pulled from his truck and severely beaten. as a camera crew broadcast the event live from a news. Horrific. And so one of the questions that Sternfeld had when he initially started this book was, is the U.S. a particularly violent nation with all these murders and all these beatings and all these sites of catastrophe and calamity and mourning? This is a house that Sternfeld photographed because there was a shootout between two rival drug dealers. One drug dealer, to protect himself from the other drug dealer firing, pulled a little boy off this porch and used him as a body shield. And the little boy was killed. He was shot. And the two drug dealers were arrested and sent to prison. Which leads me to the point, is Sternfeld just collecting all these tragedies for us for no reason? I think one sense that I get from this book is that he wants to prompt us to notice or prompt us to do something. And I almost want to say he's prompting us to do something, because why collect all these terrible events? It's a very moving, very sad book, but it's powerful. He has a book that comes out after this called Sweet Earth, and it is the exact opposite of On This Site, because Sweet Earth is about utopian communities, and Joel Sternfeld goes all across the U.S. and into Canada, photographing communities that intentionally segregate themselves from society and want to live a different way, a way that they deem as better. A lot of these locations are kind of nondescript. This is a site where Michael Jordan's dad was the basketball player. Michael Jordan's father was found. His car was found. And later, 2 teenagers were charged with first-degree murder. One of the things that Sternfeld photographs too, I think, is irony. This is a site where a homeless woman froze to death. She froze to death at a bus stop outside the Department of Housing and Urban Development in Washington, D.C. What Sternfeld concludes in the afterword of this book is that he intended to go out and try to understand if the U.S. was a particularly violent nation, and the personal aspects of all these tragedies kind of led him to believe that these aren't tragedies in the U.S., these are tragedies, period, and all of humanity kind of bears the brunt of them. They're not New York's tragedies, they're not Washington's, they're not South America's tragedies, they're all of humanity's tragedy, and there's something that we all have to fix. But I think some of the strongest work, particularly photo books, start off with a photographer seeking to answer a question, and then by the end of the project, they modify that question, or they realize that they weren't asking the right one, but they discover something more valuable along the way. Though this book is somber, I think it's important. It's important that we face these scenes of tragedy, I think, so that they don't go unnoticed. And this book is, in many ways, a catharsis. And it reminds you how delicate humanity is at its best and at its worst. But it's a very, very powerful book. And I think one thing to take away from this book is how, whether it's a physical or social landscape, photography offers a particular strength in how it records reality for better or worse, whether the sites are tragic or sites of heroism. But yeah, Joel Sternfeld on the site. Okay, so what did y'all think? It's was there a specific location that resonated with you? Was there a story, perhaps, that you weren't aware of? Um, uh, the one about the river that catches fire is a pretty crazy one to me. But let me know in the comments which location you resonated with the most, or maybe a location that if he were to do this work now, what would he photograph as a site of somewhere where a tragedy happened. Yeah. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.